So with that, we'll go ahead and hop in here and get started. Today, we're going to spend some time looking on the topic of stocking lengths and how they impact different things. So first, we'll just lay a quick foundation of just how some of the general functions work, which may be repeat for some of you, but on the other hand, for some of you, may just be new information, actually. So the first question to touch on here is what do stocking lengths relate to? I mean, obviously they relate to wood and engineered wood and maybe steel for some of you. Basically, what lengths of materials can they come in? But as far as how do they actually get utilized in the program, and that's an important distinction as far as what application types do they actually get used for. So they used in pre-built, stocking lengths get considered that you've entered for two different types of applications. There's the SQL type applications, which you can see here on the right-hand side of in my list here. I have my application of beam, and over here on the right-hand side indicates what type of application it is. In this case, it's an SQL, or what we would call a structural quantity length. Stuff where you would need things to not be spliced, and where you need actually specific lengths of materials. The other type of application where stocking lengths are considered would be what we'd call an NQL type application. So a classic example of that would be barge. Notice it's NQL. And when we talk about barge, we're talking about this long finished piece on the outside of the building there hanging out over the pitched portion of the roof. And in some cases like that, you might have a 30 or 40-foot barge running there on a large building. And of course, you don't need to order a 40-foot board. You'll just end up splicing that. But at the same time, you would also want your available stocking lengths, if you're calling lumber type products, to be considered so that you're sending the appropriate lengths and appropriate mix of items in order to meet that long length. So NQL type applications, they allow for splices if needed. SQL applications don't, but those are the two types that will actually consider the stocking lengths that you enter for your products. So jumping over here to the profile tab, across the top here, you notice we're on labeling right now, but we're going to stocking lengths. And when it comes to stocking lengths, you can enter them in a couple different ways. So first of all, when it comes to lumber, I'm just going to focus on lumber entry right here at the moment. We can enter a single value. So if I just only stock 16 footers, which might be odd for lumber, but if I only stock 16s, then I could just enter a single value like 16s. Or if I enter multiple different lengths, then I could do that too, just by putting a space in between. So let's say that I wanted to say I stock 10s, 14s, 16s, and 20s. And I could enter those that way, or maybe 10s, 14s, 16s, 18s, and 20s. Now, at this point, the software is going to, if you enter multiple entries like this, it's going to want to actually simplify this, at least for itself, into ranges. And that's what you can also do as well, but I'll show you that here in a second. So as soon as I tab out, this is going to change to I stock 10 footers, and then 14 to 20s by 2-foot increments. So this little notation here, and I'm going to get rid of our 10 footers here or actually I'll just make it 10 to 20 by 2-foot increments just to make it simple. So I have 10 to 20 foot by 2. So all that's happened here is I have 3 little periods that are in the center to indicate a range. So the first value would be the starting point. Then the dots represent or indicate that there's a range happening here. And then the last value entered would be the end of that range. The X2 is the increments in which it's going by. So if you wanted to have that indicate like 1-foot increments, then you could have an X1 on the end if you wanted it to be like 4-foot increments. So for example, if I had 12s, 16s, and 20s, it's going to say, oh, well, that's 12 to 20 by 4-foot increments. So you're not limited to a particular increment level. If it's 1 or if it's 4 or if it's 2 or it's 5, whatever that happens to be, you can leverage that. And then like you saw before, if you stock something that's not really a part of that range, you can also have that in there. So like I could add a 24 on the end here. Oh, well, that didn't change anything. I could add a 26 on the end, and there we go. We've got my range as well as the additional stocking length that I have. So that's the general use of how you can enter those different values, different ranges that might be necessary for a specific item. Now, when it comes to stocking lengths, you can enter these at multiple different levels. So first of all, you can go to a specific category. So like lumber. So I can make a broad stroke statement and say, hey, I stock 8 to 16 by 2s. Helps if you put all the periods in there. So if I put 8 to 16s by 2s in there, there's my general stocking length list for lumber. Now, if I wanted to deviate from that and say, well, that's true for most of my lumber, and that will cover a lot of the cases, but let's say for, generally speaking, for all of my 4x4 material, I'm just going to talk specifically about 4x4. I want to add a different length. So I'm going to say 4x4s, and I want those just to be 12s and 16s. So I can make that entry. And now notice that I have an entry here for the specific product family. Now, it doesn't have any attributes with it, like SYP or treated or number 2 in meta or something like that. It's just 4x4s in general. And so that will apply to that. Now, let's say then that I want to actually make a more specific and say my treated material for my 4x, it only comes in 16 footers. So I could come again and I can say, well, I'm going to go into 4x4. And then I'm going to arrow to the right, just like you're used to in other cases. And I'm going to set the very specific product that I want to call SYP number 2, in this case, treated. And I'm going to say this comes in just 16s. And I'll make that entry. And now that is there. Now, the important distinction for you to know is that when it comes to making specific entries here, this applies to only what you have entered. So if I was to make another entry like this, 4x4, and I'll do just, I'll just leave all these blanks and just mark this as treated. So if I did a 4x4 treated and hit 20, you need to be aware that this is not going to cover everything else as long as it includes treated. So if you call a 4x4 SYP number 1 treated, this will not cover that. So anything that's at this level, this is going to be a exact dead on match is in order for it to function. So if you wanted, so if SYP number 2 treated is what you're calling, then you would get 16 footers. If you called it out as 4x4 SYP number 1 treated, doesn't match this, doesn't match this, so it's going to fall back up to the 4x4 level and it's going to get this value. If we were calling a 4x6, which obviously is not listed anywhere in this table down here, it would fall back up to whatever's been entered here. So you can enter at those, basically those 3 different levels: the category, a product family, and then the specific product type. Also, one other note up in this category level, if you were to expand here and we went to EWP and say, well, for like say my Anthony engineered wood that I might be able to order, well, okay, you know, maybe that only comes in 1 to 30, you know, by 1 foot increment. So you could make specific entries for that, or you could even dial it in further and say, well, for the glulam's it's this, or for the beams it's that. So for the categories, you can drill in a little bit and be a little bit more, while still being very broad strokes with it. You can kind of dial into the specific product areas where you might be making entries. So those are the ways that you can make entries. So then jumping from there, I'm going to jump down to stud stocking lengths. So if you're using wall assemblies, there's a couple of things to be aware of down here. One would be the region. A lot of the country and a lot of people just use the 92 and 5/8 as kind of the typical that you might get for your pre-cut levels. But there are the other markets out there that are going to be different, like 92 and a quarter or 93 inches, you know, or where they tend to vary away and have different spots. So you can pick your particular region that you tend to use, and that will adjust things accordingly for you over here in your pre-cut sections. But once you pick your region, then you can define which particular pre-cuts that you like to have or make use of for your wall assemblies as they're calculated out. You can also make specific entries here if you have custom ones that you want to do. Quick note on that is, you know, that can be handy, especially if you have just ones that are custom for a particular job. You know, maybe it's not ones that you would normally stock, but if once you start your project, you want to say, hey, yeah, I need to be able to ship, you know, 93 and a quarter studs for this job, then you can come in here and make that entry, and those will be considered in your possible pre-cuts that are included. If you're using engineered wood for a wall assembly and you want pre-cuts to be available, you'll want this box checked. If you don't want them to be available, meaning like if you have like a tall wall condition, and you're going to be shipping LVL for the studs, but it's like, well, I don't want to ship 92 and 5/8 or even 116 and 5/8 for that matter. You just want to ship 10 footers or 9 footers or just use the available stocking lengths that are normal. Then you would want to uncheck that box. That way you're not getting that behavior for your engineered type wood. So that kind of covers the general controls that you might have seen to the eye as you look through it. But now I want to touch on a couple other things as they relate to stocking lengths that you may want to leverage further. One of the key ones relates to what we would call maximum optimization length. And there, I'm going to actually just do this already. There is a video that we've put together in our knowledge base about this, and I'm going to chat that into the chat window there. There's a link there that you can follow. Video that you can maybe look at later that just overall explains the concept of optimization length. But in short, the idea is what is the cap at which you are able to optimize things into. So by default, pre-built will optimize small pieces. So when we say optimize, we're saying take small pieces and put them into larger available stocking lengths. So header's a great example. If you had drawn 4s and 5s and 6s and 3s of headers, you want those to roll up into lengths you can actually ship out to the job site. So they need to be optimized in as efficient a way as possible into your available stocking lengths. By default, if you make no other entries up here, you're going to get the behavior of it won't optimize into anything longer than 20 feet. In fact, it says the maximum optimization length is 20 feet. So it's not going to go above 20 feet. And as long as there's a stocking length up to 20 feet, it will try to use it. Now, a great example of where you might want to make an adjustment on this might be 4x4s. You might be able to get your 4x4s, and I'm going to change my 4x4 level here to 10 to, or we'll go with 8 to 20s by 2 foot increments, and so if you need to have a long 4x4, like 20 feet or 18 feet, you would want to be able to order it. It's like, if you have a deck post that's that tall, you need a deck post that's tall, or whatever the case is. And maybe this is not 4x4, maybe it's 4x6. But if you're not shipping something that actually needs to be that long, a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to ship it, optimize a bunch of small 4x4 pieces into an 18-footer or a 20-footer, because that's just, that's not going to be pretty once it gets out to the job site and sits out there in the sun for a while. It's going to twist up and everything else. So I want to ship shorter lengths, generally speaking. I don't want to optimize into something longer. So we could make a notation here, and we could say, I'm going to say MOL, maximum optimization length, is 16. Okay, and so I can make that entry. And now when I go to use material, when it goes to optimize material for 4x4s, it's only going to look at 16 footers and shorter as things that it can put small pieces into. Now, if you still need an 18 footer or a 20 footer, it will use the stocking lengths that are available. So totally, you're going to get your available stocking lengths. But when it comes to putting small pieces into big pieces, you've capped it. Instead of it being at 20 by the default, you can cap it to 16. So you can see an obvious use case there. Another example of this might be engineered wood. If you're in the 2-foot market, and you say, well, I have 2 foot, I can get my engineered wood in 2 to 48 by 2 foot increments. By default, if you have some odd lengths that are coming in, like 5s and 7s, there will be cases where it will say, oh, well, I can optimize a 5 and a 7 into a 12. And you might like that, or you might not like that. And so if you don't like that behavior, you just want everything to just go to the nearest even foot, then you could leverage this feature again. You could say MOL 2, basically saying, don't optimize anything into anything bigger than a 2-footer. So everything else is just going to roll up to the next available stocking lengths that it can do. So you can use maximum optimization lengths, that control of MOL, to dial things down in that sense, to keep it from optimizing. The other reason that you may want to use this, engineered wood is also another good example, would be when you're trying to, in a sense, dial that number up. if you are in a situation where you only stock, say, an order in for your engineered wood, maybe it's for not all of your engineered wood, maybe it's just LVLs, but you only order in, say, we order in stock, 20s and 28s and 34s. Now at this point, this is not actually going to optimize very well for you, because you'll remember that by default, if you make no other entry, it's not going to optimize smaller pieces into anything longer than 20 feet. So while you only stock this and you tend to cut everything out of whatever is available, you could still have this collection, but if you then made the entry of MOL is 60, just to get it way up there, now it will look at your 28s and your 34s and your 20s and say, okay, I can take all these small collection of small pieces and optimize them into any of those. I'm not capped at 20. I can extend all the way up through any of those. So use MOL to dial it down, or use MOL to dial it up, depending on what your specific situation is. Okay, so be aware of that. Check out that video for a more detailed explanation of what MOL is. But now jumping back over to the list, I also want to make you aware when it comes to stocking lengths that you have the ability to do specific line overrides. So for example, let's come back over here to my upper floor. So here's my floor joist, and let's say, right now my 2x10s, they're getting 8 to 16s by 2s. If I wanted to specifically override, say, hey, for this case, I want to actually extend my available stocking lengths. I only want them to goes in 8s and 14s and 16s, just for whatever reason. So I'm going to come here to my little wrench icon, and I'm going to say MOL, or actually in this case, material lengths, because that's what we're changing. Material lengths, 8s, 14s, and 16s, and click OK. And so now I've made that change here, and all my 2x10s will only ship out in those available lengths. It's going to optimize into them into the best options possible. And then, of course, if you have items that are longer than those lengths, such as these 20 footers, it's going to say, well, this is structural, so you need to order a 20 footer anyways. But main point here is that you can override this. The other point is that if you don't have that little wrench icon, so if I have a 2x10 here, and I just have some 4 20 footers, if I wanted to be able to optimize, actually, I'll make this different. I'll say this is 4 8s and 6 10s. Flash there. Even though I don't have that little wrench icon, I can actually still make that adjustment. I can do a space, ML, and I'll say, 14s, or do the same thing as I did above. I'll do 8, 8s, 14s, and 16s. And again, it's going to do that. So you have the wrench icon when it's a linked item and you can't get into this field anyways, because it's kind of locked and it's paying attention only to the digitizer. But when the field's open, you can make that same entry here and get that same result. Finally, last item when it comes to stocking lengths, and this is one of those things like like spices, use with care, use with caution, so to speak, or use with sparingly, kind of like salt. And that would be if you need to make specific stocking length adjustments for specific applications, that is also possible. So a good example of this that we see from time to time would be headers. There's some people out there just say, hey, you know what, even though I stock for 2x10s, I stock 8s to 16s by 2 foot increments as a general statement. When it comes to headers, I just know how my market is, and the windows we typically see and the way the builders typically build, it's just better if we just send all 14 footers. Okay, so if you want in a specific application to have a specific set of stocking lengths, then you can handle that by going to the Profile tab. And instead of stocking lengths, we're going to head over here to the Formulas tab, and we're going to come to that Structural QL, since this is the most common place you might be using that. We could go down to the specific applications, such as header, and we could say, hey, I only want to ship or stock 14 footers. And that's how I want to optimize. And so if we've made that entry, then any of those line items over there that are actually headers would get that value used for the stocking lengths. Now, that's going to apply to any product. If you wanted to dial that in further and say, well, I only want that to apply to 2x10s, you could click on here and you could come down to 2x10s, and we could find that in the list and say, okay, for my 2x10s, I want 14 footers. For everything else, let's just run with what we normally do. So you can make that entry there at that level instead. So that was the final thing to show you there as far as how stocking lengths that as needed, you can do that for applications. As I mentioned, you don't want to get carried away with that, only just because it just becomes a large maintenance nightmare to have to apply all your stocking lengths all over all these different applications, where generally speaking, you should just be able to apply them here, and then they'll be applied across the different application levels as needed. But if you need some specific exceptions, that would be how you can do that. And that covers most of the things we wanted to talk about stocking lengths this time. So hopefully that's some helpful information there. I will note, even as we finish up here today, that we have a release that's coming soon. And then, yeah, even as I close here, if you have some comments or have questions, certainly throw them into the QA. If there's ones that seem that we should cover here as a group, we can do that. But we also have a release, like I was just saying, coming out shortly, has some pretty a couple of exciting features that are in it. So yeah, look for that. Probably middle of next week is when it should be headed out there. So grab that when you see that come through. So thanks everybody for jumping on today. And if you have more questions, we'll hang around here for a little bit. But thanks for getting in. Hopefully we get you some more good information next week as we go into our next webinar. Talk to you later. Have a good afternoon.